Welcome to the OMEP webinar, How to Deal with COVID in Early Childhood Education and Care. I am Mercedes Mayor-Lasage, World President of the OMEP, the World Organization for Early Childhood Education. The OMEP World Executive Committee decided to facilitate this webinar to address about health and well-being of children in early childhood during COVID-19 times. As you can remember, during 2019, our past president, Dr. Yoon-hee Park, with the collaboration of Dr. Soon-Hwan Kim, organized the first webinars on OMEP history. For the organization of this one, I want to acknowledge and thank the help of Dr. Soon-Hwan Kim, President of the OMEP Korean National Committee. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused major changes to the daily life of young children and their families. This has affected them in different ways due to the vast inequalities and diversities in experiencing childhood. All over the world, sanitary policies has imposed closing schools as well as other services linked to the protection of young children. Preschools closures have critical consequences and presents risk over children's well-being and development. These institutions offer broad function. They offer learning opportunities to children, but also provide a space for strengthening bonds with peers, significant adults and caregivers, assuring nutrition and protected environment, as well as psychosocial support for the families. Unfortunately, millions of children are affected. However, those who have their human rights vulnerated by poverty, deep inequalities, violence, natural disasters, etc., are the most damaged. For young children, every single day is of vital importance for their psychical, emotional, and mental health. The risks are visible and invisible over integral health and development, as well as the fulfillment of human rights to education, to play, participation, access to culture, to water and sanitation, to nutrition, among other relevant rights. This webinar proposes to analyze perspectives and experiences to find useful principles, useful strategies directed to governments, to stakeholders, schools board, educators, families, and other caregivers in order to protect early childhood human rights and citizenship, in order to continue guiding and supporting families in protecting and educating young children at home and in their communities, and to collaborate in planning and appropriate proposals for the reopening of early childhood education and care programs, considering the special characteristics and the needs of this fundamental stage. This webinar will include 2 keynote presentations from specialists who have medical, psychological, political, and pedagogical expertise, Dr. Jessica Essary and Dr. Raul Mercer. Dr. Jessica Essary is a North American pedagogue. She is an associate professor of education and director of the Inclusive Education program at Cazenovia College. Jess is one of our representatives at the UN headquarters in New York, with Maria Pia Belloni, Judith Wagner, Donna Aquilo Wright, Patricia Hanley, and Kimberly Ann Kopko. Dr. Raul Mercer is an Argentinian pediatrician, master in epidemiology, coordinator of the Flaxo Social Science and Health Program, and member of the Lancet WHO UNICEF Commission on a Future of the World's Children. Raúl is also a friend and a devoted partner in the advocacy for children's human rights. To all the participants and colleagues who are with us today, I inform you that in the chat, you will be able to read their curricula with more details. Well, let's start our webinar listening to Raúl Mercer. Please, Raúl, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Mercedes, for your introduction. I want to share some private issues with all of you. We agreed with Jessica yesterday a deal that our expectation is to promote endorphins instead of adrenaline. So the idea is to be relaxed, although we are a bit nervous at the very beginning of this session, but we ask you to enjoy, just to have this experience as something that will stimulate us to rethink this conflict situation that we are going through. So first of all, I want to thank OMEP through Mercedes, Sun, Jessica, and all the collaborators for having me to share this opportunity with you, to be able to generate bridges of knowledge and understanding between education and health, attending to the common objective that we share, that is promoting the health and well-being of children. For some time to now, the planet has started an unexpected journey conditioned by COVID-19 pandemic. And today we are in this webinar as a space of importance that expresses the need to share our views, opinions, feelings, and responses to the challenge of living with various threats that go beyond the biological agent, the virus. So in addition, the meaning of this meeting is to reflect together, to accompany us, to know that we are not alone, and that it is crucial to rescue positive values within the social fabric, such as solidarity, humanitarian aid, and preservation of our common home, the earth. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my presentation. As you know, English is not my mother's language, so I will use these visual aids to help us to understand some of the contents. So I'm going through, and please let me know if you can see.
Yes.
Okay, so please don't cry for me, Argentina. So let's go ahead. So this is the content of the presentation. First of all, I will share with you a short story and an introduction. What does it mean, social pediatrics? And this is out of script. Then I will go through these 3 points in terms of knowing where are the children in the pandemic, the effects of the current pandemic on children's rights and health, and finally, the modalities of response from the field of social pediatrics. So what happened on February 19 of 2020 is that we were in a meeting with WHO in Geneva trying to launch a report that represented 2 years of work of more than 40 professionals around the world. And there was a joint venture together with WHO, UNICEF, and Lancet with the idea of repositioning child health and well-being within the SDGs, considering that many accomplishments were made in terms of reducing infant mortality, improving child health. But in the middle of the room, people were nervous around because a virus started to circulate in the planet. So we were in the very beginning of this process of this pandemic. And as you can imagine, the pandemic itself had a negative effect on our work in terms of trying to bring light of what's the future for our world children. And just some of the highlights of this report. First, the report recognized that there were improvements, but there are still millions of children around the world that suffer exclusion, hunger, sickness, and violence But were two main issues that were highlighted. One has to do with environmental threats in terms of the so-called climate crisis, and the other one that is not well known among children, that are the commercial threats. I will talk about this issue a bit more. So when I mention these issues, just try to think about how these issues are still relevant in the context of the pandemic or not. So what we know is that children are at risk of commercial marketing. And we know that children are not merchandise. And the commercial sector is affecting children through selling products that are harmful for their health, and also using children as objects of targets of their marketing strategies. And this, as you can imagine, affects their children in terms of generating behaviors in terms of consumption of food or beverage with sugar that will affect their lives, their health, not now, but also in the long term. So this is something that we wanted to bring to the table, considering that there are not organizations that are protecting the children to this kind of threat. And some people, they have to assume their advocate role in terms of preventing the effect of this commercial marketing, because we have another information based on the evidence. The commercial industries, they don't regulate themselves. So we have to establish some rules in terms of what can they do or not with the children. Another important issue that has been raised in this report has to do with what children think that is important for their lives and well-being. So we try to also to rescue the voices of the children around the world and see what they bring to us. They value family togetherness. They value also clean environments, access to education and culture, the opportunity to play, and think about these issues, if they are still valid or not in terms of the pandemic. And we understand that these are key issues that are also relevant, not because the report, but also in this particular place. So with this brief introduction, I just want to present this report, and I will give you at the end of this presentation the coordinates to access to the full report, to invite you to learn it, to read it. The second comment has to understand that what is a determinant of health. So, and this graph, what tries to present is just what's the contribution of different factors to create or to build the idea of health. So as you can see, there are many determinants related with our behaviors, the socioeconomic situation, the physical environment. Some has to do with our biology and part of the clinical care. This is medicine. So as you can see, the proportion or the contribution that we doctors make towards the generation of health is just a quota. It's just a little part of this cake. It's just a piece to understand that many efforts can be done in terms of promoting health. You, as educators, from our perspectives as social pediatricians, you are health workers. Of course, you are not physicians. You know that you don't work in a healthcare facility, but educating children, promoting their development is a way to promote health. And the evidence shows that education is associated with increased life expectancy, with reduce of morbidity, promote healthy behaviors, and also to promote better opportunities to access to decent work in the future. And also, talking about health determinant, education is the most important modifiable social determinant of health. As we enter at the post-COVID era, there is an unprecedented opportunity to integrate SDGs 3 and 4, this means education and health, to achieve an interdependent goals of healthy, resilient, and fair societies, as it happens with the interdependencies of rights. Because as you know, rights are interdependent, are indivisible, and they are universal. So this is a good point of departure to understand and to understand the importance of working together. So this is not a utopia, it's not a dream, this is a must to need to integrate health and education. And finally, as a comment, what does it mean social pediatrics? This is something that has to do with the discipline that we approach health of the children with a public health perspective, with a community perspective, with a social determinants perspective, and also is an equity-based and rights-based approach. So this is not something only restricted to the pediatricians. As far as I understand, OMEP is not an organization only devoted for educators. So it's time to go beyond the box and to try to integrate disciplines, approaches, lenses, views of the reality. So we have an organization that is the International Society of Social Pediatrics that we are spread all over the world working on this field as OMEP is working. So let's go through the presentation and the main three areas. So what do we know about the place of children in the pandemic? So we know that children are not so much visible, and there are many factors that contribute to this situation. First, children are not at high risk for a direct effect of COVID infection directly. But at the same time, children were considered as potential threats for various transmissions. So there was a sort of weaponization of children, considering that they can be all threats for our lives, for adults. And also another point that I would like to share with you as a metaphor is that children are the largest forced migration in history. Imagine that never happened, that 1.5 billion people migrated, in this particular case, from the school system to their homes. So this never happened. And this you have to understand as a social process, complex process that affect lives of children, the families at present, and of course also in the future. And another issue that I wanted to raise with you is two aspects. One has to do with the infodemia, that is a sort of epidemics caused by the information. We are totally bombarded by information, fake information, true information, but information itself is transforming our lives. And our country, all the population, they are all becoming specialists in infectious diseases and epidemiologists. And we understand as social pediatricians that the problem of COVID goes beyond the infection itself. And this is something that we must understand. And finally, medicalization, that is a way to try to explain everything that happens in life, in health and disease, as something related with the biomedical system that, as you could see before, it only represents 10% of the pie. So we cannot explain all what happens in children's lives using only a biomedical model. And when we do this approach so restricted, it affects also the lives of the people. So, as a result, children do not appear at the center of the debates around the world in terms of the pandemic. Children are not considered significantly in relation to other population groups, as it happens with grown-up people or elderly people. And finally, children enter into a nest of invisibility due to the conditions of life which they live, particularly those living in poverty, with disabilities, children in zones of armed conflicts, in humanitarian settings, children living in the streets, and also those with underlying health conditions. Let's go now to the second part of the presentation. And I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. I'm doing well. Mercedes, can you make me a...
Yes, you have 8 minutes more.
Oh, it's a whole life.
9 minutes. Yes,
Okay.
You are very...
Thank you.
Very good with your...
So using the socioeconomic ecological model, what we can see is that the pandemic is affecting the sociocultural factors, norms, society, community, family, and children, disrupting our relations, disrupting our lives, disrupting the access to institutions. So we have to go beyond the virus. We have to think this and evaluate this from a more broader and I would say comprehensive and holistic perspective. In this graph that looks complex, and the idea is just to demonstrate that this is the reality, we can divide the attributable effects of the virus, of the pandemic, into those two, I would say, effects. In those that are direct on the right, on the left of the figure of the graph, that is in violet, that is not relevant or is not too much important when we consider children compared to other age population. And on the right, what we can see, yes, are all those effects that are a consequence of the isolation, of the restrictions in essential services, the restrictions in transportation, and those as a consequence of the closure of the education facilities. So in this slide, what you can see is that all those effects in health, education, economic consequences in terms of insecurity, related stress, in terms of nutrition, domestic abuse, child abuse, conflicts, and issues related with governance. The only one that has to do with the direct effect is Kawasaki syndrome, that although this is not important from the public health point of view, perhaps it's important from the clinical approach, it generates too much stress among families. And it's a topic that has been used by media in terms of exposing families to a stressful situation that is not common. It's a rare situation. So if we want to add figures to all this complex situation, we can see that the Human Development Index is going to go back, and this is the first it happens since 1990, that the huge number of children, between 40 and 60 million people, will fall in poverty. We know the effect of the closure of the health system, moving children from the schools to their houses, and also the consequences in terms of reduction of vaccination, reduction of coverage for essential maternal and child health services, the consequences that this situation will have in terms of increasing the number of children if these essential services, they drop down for a long period. Also, additional maternal deaths, increasing wasting or in undernutrition. And also to let you know, and in terms of analysis of the situation at the global level, is that being born in a recession is estimated to reduce our life expectancy, and a fall of 1% in the employment leads to 2% increase in chronic illnesses. And also, as I mentioned before, there are disruptions in the families as a consequences of separation or death of one of the relatives, in terms of mental health, in terms of violence, in terms of sexual and reproductive rights, and other consequences. When we analyze the situation from the mental health and developmental aspect, we can see on the left the ratio of how many people that are affected by age in terms of having mental health disorders. And as you can see, there is not too much information dealing with how this affects from a population base in the population, in the children under 5. And in the same way, using another approach that has to do with the global burden of disease, that is a complex epidemiological indicator, the proportion of children affected by developmental and mental health disorders compared to other groups, age groups, is not so significant. When we try to characterize the problems, either mental health or developmental health problems by age, well, we can see that there are some problems that are characteristics of each age. And what COVID generates is an increase of the existing prevalent problems, but for that age. In other words, COVID pandemic is a sort of amplifier, or a situation that in some ways enhance the existing structural situation that affect children in our globe. This graph, what tries to demonstrate is there are 3 waves that affect or impact COVID on children. The first one on the left has to do with the direct impact of the pandemic that takes only days. The second takes months, that has to do with the reduction on the reduction and the restriction to access to services in the effect of coverage of basic services. The third one has to do with the effect on management of chronic underlying conditions, and also how can it affect in terms of this connection of social services and support. And the final one that is green and is something is a wave that is growing but does not end at the end, is the most concern for me and for us, for social pediatricians, because these are the long-term consequences of COVID in terms of what will happen with the psychological trauma, the physical and mental impact, the educational impact, and the social disconnection that will generate this particular situation. In other words, what we can see is that children are exposed to adverse child experiences early lives will have effect on the long term in different stages of future lives. I prefer to talk about SACE in terms of ACE. So from our perspective, there are socially adverse child experiences, considering that this situation is affecting large number of people. So going ahead and going to the final part of the presentation, the question is, which are the modalities of response that we can generate from the social pediatrics arena? So, as I mentioned, we worked in ESOP, that is the International Society of Social Pediatrics, in different lines that can be presented in this slide, creating global networks in different regions. We have 7 regional groups working in different topics like research. And for this purpose, we have more than 30 ongoing projects trying to generate information and knowledge how to approach the COVID pandemic, dealing with psychological effects, immunization coverage, violence, policies development, comparative analysis between countries. We have also case studies in terms of knowing that we have a lot of manuals, protocols, regulation, recommendations, declaration, but we don't know how to put this in practice. So we are trying to gather our experiences from different parts of the world, trying to know how we are doing what. We also work on advocacy activities, and still also we have projects dealing with child voices. This is an example of the kind of work we do. We have a bi-monthly bulletin of our society that is free, of course. These are some of the ongoing publications based on the topic I mentioned before. And this is our declaration that I put this in this slide together with my position paper, because when I read both declaration and the position paper, I find that there are common values, there are common interests, there are common goals, and I feel that this is a good time to try to build bridges between these communities that I would say that because the organization and historical point of view, we are separated, but I think that it's time to engage, it's time to build together, it's time to collaborate, and also time to understand that we are not alone. Again, talking about the importance of marketing or the social and commercial determinants of health, digital advertising became an important issue in this time. So we try to approach the digital world from the lack of connectivity for education, but we don't make any comment about the quality of information children get through this pandemic. And we will know there are very strong strategies of the industry to promote activities, behaviors, and resources that are not good for children's health. So this is just a policy statement that came out last month from the American Academy of Pediatrics, trying to alert or to generate a word of the bad consequences of the digital advertising of children to children. We can talk about a little more later about this issue. So to end this presentation, the problem is in front of us. I mean, when we talk about children's rights, there are no borders. For all of us, the rights of the child are important in each corner of the planet. And our mission is to protect, to fulfill, to respect the children's rights independently on where we are. And I think that this situation, this particular situation that we have to go through is a call of action for action. And also, as Greta Thunberg said, this is a crisis of children's rights. We have to try to promote the rights of every child in each place where they live. Based on this, and I promise I'm going to finish right now, we can use a sort of symbolic way to approach the COVID, using an umbrella image. And what I feel is that COVID has generated this kind of umbrella that is mainstreamed by stress, uncertainty, anguish, fear. And this is what is mobilizing our decisions and also the policymakers' decision. And what we are promoting is just to move to an assets approach to health based on a salutogenic model, where most of the components of this model come from education in terms of rescuing the assets, the capacities, the strengths that are in the communities. Although we are in a crisis, I mean, those assets, they are there, including, I mean, this is does not exclude anybody. So all these capacities are part of every community, every people, every society. I invite you to read this report and the recent publication of what will happen after COVID. What do you think that will happen with our world? That we understand that it's not going to be the same world, and we will think on how to promote a better world for our future and fundamentally for our children. And in this sense, I want to thank all of you, I mean, all the OMEP community, for the effort you are doing every day, trying to struggle and to find or to look for a better world for children. So I will give the floor for Jessica to get her important presentation. Thank you, Mercedes.
Thank you very much, Raul. Your words have been particularly important. I love the image of the umbrella because it is true. And you have enlightened the field and helped us to open to new perspectives in order to understand the complexity of this difficult time for all the children. I want to thank all the OMEP colleagues and committees that are accompanying this day from Colombia, Argentina, Cyprus, Italy, Turkey, Nigeria, Korea, USA, Ghana, United Arab Emirates, Japan, Sierra Leone, Greece, and others. Thank you very much. Well, slowly but surely, the time has come to listen to Jessica Essary. She will tackle ideas and strategies related to children emotional and social development and health. Please, Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mercedes. And Raul, your brilliant insights will be an asset for us as we continue with an assets approach in a positive manner to move forward during this pandemic. Thank you for those brilliant insights. This presentation is dedicated to all the young children, parents, teachers of early childhood education, ECE administrators, teacher educators, and all those professionals, other professionals who support us in this work that we do. For just a moment, I want to take, I know we're limited on time, but I think it's really important during this pandemic to take just a brief moment of silence for all of those that we have lost. So we understand that it's very important work we're doing. And the question today that I'm going to be discussing is, how can young children participate in meaningful activities, friendships, and other learning opportunities in 2020 during a global pandemic? As Mercedes mentioned, my name is Jess, UN delegate and associate professor of education at Cazenovia College. The insights that I'm going to present today, it would behoove me to mention that, this is my work and not necessarily opinions of my affiliates. And it's a pleasure to be here. I was a first and fourth grade teacher in a migrant community with high poverty, 99% free and reduced lunches, to give you an idea of what that looks like. And I was also a head teacher of 3 to 5 year olds at an early childhood research center for 3 years of my career. I spent 4.5 years at Zayed University in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, and a couple of years at Ole Miss, a Research One institution, before coming to Cazenovia College, a historic institution in New York, a private school, and definitely allows the opportunity to connect with students with a small school population, only approximately 1,000 students. Lots of opportunities to get to know my students, and that's the best part of my job. It's commonly understood in one way or another, the routines children maintained prior to COVID-19 suddenly shifted when the pandemic impacted countries around the world. We are all well aware of this. But there are a variety of challenges for children and their families. And I organize those challenges into a few categories here. Financial challenges. There are many examples, but one, we have parents that have lost jobs and so forth. Social challenges. Some family are restricted from visiting family members in the hospital or traveling overseas. There are definitely material challenges, for example, lack of access to educational resources during lockdown and so forth, and physical challenges such as sickness, invasive testing, and the stress that can come along with these sort of things. Again, those are a few examples. There's so many more, and Raul did such a brilliant job sharing many of those with us. So how may the pandemic impact the child emotionally? We hear stories of children, and I'm hearing stories of them feeling angry and bored, perhaps. Others are exhausted because around the world, some children are working for their family. And that's a concern, that they're experiencing this exhaustion and high levels of anxiety, isolation, confusion, apprehension. When is it coming for me? Kind of feelings and fear. So how can adults help? And if you know the good old Mr. Rogers, then you might appreciate this quote here. We have to talk to children. And so Mr. Rogers said, anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that's mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they may become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. So according to some recent research, there were some common pandemic mitigation strategies in schooling in Norway and Sweden, including extra hand washing, smaller group sizes, lower teacher-child ratios, stricter sanitation requirements, prohibiting parents from entering the preschools, and some physical distancing, though there are some differences in those distancing requirements. And that's just to name a few, and some of those are beyond, utilized beyond these countries as well. So school life has changed a bit. But if we dig a bit deeper, and I realize that we're still learning things daily and things are shifting, but I just conducted a brief comparative analysis of distance education during COVID-19 and found some interesting highlights. In Estonia, there was already a lot of work around online education. There were materials, both online, curriculum materials online and in print and things. So they really had an opportunity to focus on providing parent education. And you can see from many social groups online, parents are going, I don't know, how do I become a teacher in a matter of moments? So that is particularly insightful and helpful for us to see. In France, there was a definite emphasis on individualized pedagogical experiences. The teachers were still connecting with their individual students and having those individualized conversations. In the UAE, we see a major emphasis on mobile learning, kids learning from, for example, on their iPad and moving around their house to different work areas, sharing things, taking their mobile devices even outside a bit to share different things with their friends. In Israel, they created a digital national curriculum. They had daily updates from teacher experts that loaded lessons. In Latvia, we had there was distributed parent-teacher guidelines and tech resources that we could notice there. They're really focused on providing a framework and just pushing the resources forward for individuals to use. In Norway, there was an on-site cohort model. It started for some time with the lockdown, but then quickly moved the kids back into school with a 1-to-6 or 1-to-3 teacher-child ratio, and then a 1-to-6 ratio, and eventually easing up on the cohorts and the children were able to socialize in these small cohorts without physical distancing, just due to their smaller limited size. In the USA and the UK, we see wide variation of educational support with an emphasis on computer technology. And this variation can lead to innovation, but it can also lead to inequities in what children are receiving. In Kenya, the exams are canceled and schools are scheduled to reopen in 2020 as of yet, with students repeating a year. And a lot of teachers are still engaging via SMS. There are also radio curriculum programs and various other support for continued education from the home. Some countries that never closed, Sweden and Taiwan, they provided emergency education for all children, very inclusive as an on-site response with preventative measures. In Nicaragua, there was a lack of a systematic response, and this is a concern worth reading further. So how does the stress from the pandemic influence learning? Well, we were used to our hugs, right? We don't get our hugs anymore. And those, that physical closeness that we experience even in schooling, when a teacher gives you a high five, that can release oxytocin. And oxytocin, what we know from research, this can reduce the fight or flight response. And my full references are at the end of this presentation for you to take a look at. But so it can reduce the fight or flight response, which is really important when you're undergoing stress. And unfortunately, physically distancing, we're not getting that, as much, and our families trying to make up for it as much as they can, or the people that we're with, if we're so fortunate. Endorphins when we have fun, when we're playing and learning, the endorphins that are produced can help with long-term retention of information. How powerful and exciting is that? Whereas if we're stressed and cortisol and adrenaline are released, then those combat long-term retention of information and really compromise our working memory. So stress does influence learning in a profound way, in a physical way, beyond just the social emotional impacts. So I came up with some categories of communication assumptions which may influence young children's ideas and create negative representations of pandemic events for your consideration. And on the next slide, we'll talk about some positive methods. But sometimes we see this avoidant lens, viewing the child as emotionally not ready to discuss such topics, or considering the child incapable of comprehending the concepts. Maybe the caregiver is personally overwhelmed or confused, and hence there's this avoidant lens. A suppositional lens, assuming that children naturally understand what's going on around them, or believing that one explanation is enough. I already told them what's going on, so to say, these ideas. Then there's this absolutist lens. Children may overhear negative self-talk during frustrated moments that sounds very absolutist, or they may receive a lot of conversation with an adult to the point where there's this over-explanation in an effort for the adult to kind of self-talk and compartmentalize what's going on and gain a sense of control. However, this can create a barrier for understanding the variety of human experiences when absolute comments are made and overgeneralizations are shared. Many parents and teachers still wonder how to discuss the pandemic with their young children. It's not easy, but we can teach them about the pandemic. With a compassionate pedagogical lens, We can approach it as a conversation where we intend on learning from the child and their insights and their experiences. So what does that look like? Well, we have to focus on brevity and clarity while using technical terms. Yes, young children can learn technical terms. I've seen 3-year-olds pick up some quite impressive vocabulary talking about hypothesis, and they'll use the word hypothesis in a contextually correct way. It's amazing. So you might read things where early childhood experts are saying, oh, they can't use those technical terms, but I would beg to differ. You can describe the problem rather than just simply tell them about it, but really in detail describe the problem. Consider how you can link new concepts to what they already know. Ask questions and allow wait time. Give them time to think rather than rushing forward. Oh, maybe they don't know the answer. Give them time, sit with them, make them comfortable when they're thinking about their response. Remain calm, but share your honest feelings as well as your messages of hope. And considering the context of the conversation, you might want to avoid negative associations. So for example, I wouldn't want to talk about the pandemic in a moment where my child typically relaxes and has this opportunity for free play. So for example, if my child's swinging, I don't want them to associate maybe the pandemic with their free time, free play of swinging and kind of self-care moment. Maybe if I take a walk, I'm not staring directly at the child, we're talking side by side, they can feel less pressure and I don't ruin their favorite swinging moment with notions that might cause stress. Inviting children to continue the conversation anytime is important because they may randomly want to revisit the topic, and it's important we let them know that we're open to that and we encourage it. So we have to ask questions to learn more about each child's assumptions. A child's answers may help highlight any misconceptions. For example, the adult might ask, what have you heard about COVID-19? And the answers may really surprise you, but can be quite insightful at helping us understand their perspective. Here's a 4-year-old response. I cannot go see my friends at school because there's something wrong with me. I must be sick. So this 4-year-old child probably already understands that if they stay home from school, they're sick, something's wrong. And here they're suddenly out of school and they're already making the assumption with what they've heard about COVID-19 that they are sick. Good thing we're asking, right? We don't want children to go on with this sort of assumption and the stress that comes along with it. So what are our intervention strategies? We can explain that if they feel something hurts, they should talk about it with a trusted caregiver, remind them that they're healthy otherwise. And there are proactive strategies to help them out before they feel this way. Acknowledge each child's healthy decisions and mention them often, and express health gratitude statement each day. Aren't we lucky to be so healthy, and what a privilege that is. And we're thinking about anyone that is not healthy and keeping them in our heart. Also, there are many educational issues which are critical during the pandemic. Hand washing education is a topic that's long been championed by OMEP far before the pandemic. We have to have patience while we're teaching children to wash hands. It's a critical aspect. We have to consider the safe products. We have to provide materials within the child's reach if we expect them to take initiative and to improve their sense of agency. We can use songs and chants. Wash your hands, da da dum dum dum. Wash your hands, da da dum dum dum. Wash your hands, da da dum dum dum. With a wiggle, 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 and a bum bum bum. And repeat that again because you want them to wash long enough. This gets them to practice the correct duration of wash time, practice washing method. Of course, they're practicing their musical development, the final chant while turning off the sink. Let's save the fish, not too much water. We're practicing a sustainability mindset while we're singing these songs and having our ongoing routine chants. Make it routine. We can't skip out. If we do, then we send them a hidden message that that's all right. So there are lots of issues and opportunities related to distance learning for young children. I'm just going to discuss a few due to the time we have, but I think they're very critical. So what is not recommended? Using technology instead of sensory instruction. And here's an example of sensory instruction that, you know, you can't experience this kind of thing if you're with technology alone. Making something today.
No, you tell.
Okay, Gail's making
tortilla.
Yeah, and he's already made, how many did you make?
A lot.
Exactly, well, approximately how many? 10?
Yeah, 10 to 10.
Oh, wow.
Mama,
yeah, I say that's about right. And Gail, do you have any advice? If somebody wants to make a tortilla at home?
I'm not
okay. Yeah, I'm doing it. Did you get a bowl?
Yeah.
Okay. There's only.
That's it.
If somebody wants to make a tortilla at home, what should they do?
Just roll and get some stuff, get some flour, and then mix it all up, and then maybe get some a little bit of oil out. Maybe that's at the first thing after the flour, and then that's
spectacular. So, you know, these learning experiences can happen in the home during the pandemic where the children are having opportunity for sensory learning. Using technology to teach topics such as labeling different kinds of fruit instead of that sensory instruction can take away from their learning experience. Imagine right now, if I tell you to have to think about an orange, you can probably imagine the way it tastes, the way it feels, the way it smells, just in your mind, because you've had these early learning experiences. We can't take away sensory education for young children. It has to be there, and technology can't be the substitution for sensory learning. There are lengthy durations of screen time that we're seeing, and this is a concern. Our young children, their physical development is happening so rapidly. They have to get moving. A good rule of thumb is a 2-year-old might sit for 4 minutes. A 3-year-old might sit for 6 minutes. So Guy was making something today. Sorry about that. I had a kitty cat join me. No lock on the door, and she's just coming right in. So welcome, Goose, to everyone in the world here that is watching. And so we're concerned with these lengthy durations of screen time, and that's a good rule of thumb. A 6-year-old sits for 12 minutes. Let's get them outside. Let's get them moving, or doing different physical activities, both fine motor and gross motor. So what can we do online? I guess, you know, we're not taking our devices often to climb a tree or various physical things, but what can we do? Well, we can connect with family. I hope you like these pictures of my family here on screen time. You can have quite a lot of fun, you know, they're excited about some news or being silly or laughing together. It's an excellent opportunity to connect. Use technology to offer child experiences which they may not have access to otherwise. So I might not ask a 7-year-old to dissect a frog for various reasons, but I could have them dissect a frog on an app without actually harming a frog, so to say, or feeling that they have harmed a frog. I can have them even have a flight simulation experience and learn about the controllers that a pilot has without actually flying a plane, which they probably won't get to do. So you can see how technology can offer experiences they may not have in their education otherwise. And if desired, consider an online pseudonym for your child, something they can identify with. And as we're thinking about child safety online, there are some concerns around child safety. If you are going to use a synonym, please avoid what we've seen online where parents, in an effort to be humorous or, you know, cutesy, have said, like, I'm going to call my child Pandemica in her class, or, you know, something, a corona, something related to the virus. The child is already bombarded with virus related messages. So we have to reduce those messages for the child and appreciate their identity, give them a nickname that matters to them. So there are lots of educational issues, as I mentioned, which are critical during the pandemic, including social development. Here you see Olis. This is my son. He's very disappointed that he cannot go to the park. And he was stopped post haste as he was almost reached the sidewalk there. And you can see that sheer disappointment during lockdown. But we have to help children maintain their sense of agency, providing other options for interaction, visiting new spaces. Visual messages can help parents and teachers explain their expectation if they do travel to new spaces, and if lockdown is reduced and a child, which is perhaps less vulnerable than, for example, our elderly population, will move out in these spaces such as schools. What are the expectations? Do we have tape marked as to where they should stand? Clear visual messages around hand washing and various things to help them understand what we want to see them do. And then what can you do?
You have 2 minutes more.
Thank you, Mercedes. What can you do when you can't go to the park? What can you do to socialize? So I've seen some fun things like having an outdoor concert with neighbor friends, and each child taking turns singing on a stump, and bubble blowing contests, and climbing trees, and enjoying hammock chats at a distance, chalk talk viewing exchanges. Okay, I'll trade you spaces. You can see my chalk drawing, I'll see yours. Distance picnics with neighbors. There also, small teacher-child ratios may allow for less physical distancing and cohort interactions, which we can explore. But please repeat after me. I will only physically distance. I will make every effort not to socially distance. We don't want to create an apathetic development experience for these children where they're apathetic towards society and they feel like lockdown is without involvement in their society is a permissible way to be. We want them to be civically engaged. I know there's a lot of research on youth civic engagement, not as much with early childhood, but in early childhood civic engagement looks like different forms of giving to others. Even if it's as simple as Gael painted a rock and he brought it to the neighbor, and the neighbor has it in his garden now to know that we're thinking of him during the pandemic, something simple like this. And the last slide, how do we deal with psychological trauma related to this pandemic? There are different types of stress, both primary and secondary. Children experience stress when their parents are stressed. Primary stress from one case can be experienced at the same level of stress when measured on a secondary level. So what are the symptoms? Nightmares, recurring intrusive thoughts. There's a variety of symptoms. There's a new publication out specifically dealing with stress among educators for you to read here. And we can do a lot of things to support strategies for reducing stress, having compassion, satisfaction in moments where children have struggled, but we see the silver lining. They're persevering. Different forms of therapy, music, art, play therapy, and self-care. Will a warm bath at the end of the night do it? No, we need all of these things in combination. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this process. I'm forever grateful for the invitation, and I look forward to the continued conversation. Please reach out and contact me one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for the lovely images of children that we have enjoyed them, and we appreciate your presentation. It has been very valuable, not only for our colleagues all over the world, but also for families and caregivers that need a lot of support for raising and educating young children in this time. I want to thank again our colleagues that are with us. I know that people from the American International School of Freedom have sent a lovely message. ISOP, the General Secretary from Spain, from Paraguay, from Mexico, and the other countries are still here with us. Well, we are incredibly happy receiving all your messages from all over the world. In order to accomplish our schedule, I have summarized some messages, and I have one question for each panelist. The first question is for Raul. And is this regarding the recommendation of that study that you have presented, Lancet, WHO and UNICEF report that you mentioned in your presentation, do you think there are still, it is still valid in this context of the current pandemic? What is your opinion about this issue, Raul?
Thank you, Mercedes, for your question. I think that in this place, we need to think beyond the pandemic, and we have to imagine that there is life beyond the pandemic, and the children, they deserve the best kind of response from our society, from the policymakers. Well, we can summarizing express that the pandemic had a multiplier and amplifier effect on the structural problems that already exist in the society. When I'm talking structural problems, I'm talking about poverty, I'm talking about social exclusion, I'm talking about inequities, I'm talking about of lack of access to basic services like as education and health. I'm talking about the consequences in terms of social disruption and family disruption. So we are going to see that all these problems will increase as a consequence of the pandemic. And the main challenge is to rebuild this tie, this relation, these networks in the society. And our publication, actually, it reinforces the importance of bringing a better world of the children, trying to attack the root causes of the problems that are installed in our society. So again, I think that in this time, this situation is more relevant. And also the report also promotes the need to think that it's not only important to reduce infant mortality, but also to assure better quality of life for the majority that survives. So again, is a call of action, is a time to discuss, and is a time to rebuild our scenario that is very, very complex. Again, thank you, Mercedes, all the team, and Jessica, your presentation was wonderful.
Thank you, Raul. We appreciate your support and your ideas. And well, the next question is for Jessica. Some people are asking about guidance for care and education in early childhood. What do you suggest about differentiated education during COVID-19?
I'm so glad you asked, because this is such a critical topic. We want to be as inclusive as possible. Children need to learn from each other, need to be empathetic and understand each other. How will they have these opportunities when they're separated? But for our children with technically diagnosed needs, they warrant individualized attention, as every child does, but in specialized ways. And their primary providers still need access to receive support from experts in various fields whenever they are trying to know how to provide that child with everything they need in the moment they need it. Even, training on how to feed a child with a feeding tube and various things. So they need that support, and we can't just shut off those resources. There's definitely resource scarcity, and they need an opportunity to check out materials from the school, for example, that they're used to having to help them with their daily life and learning. So we have to give this to the primary service providers, and that is a specialized need for them, and their families are more at risk for adverse mental health effects. There can be large demands on the families depending on what's needed for the child. So we have to be ready to provide those and provide them in a personalized manner. All children need to receive, they warrant attention. And we have to remember that as we're going through this distance learning experience in many places, our children are not Ferraris coming out of a factory, different groups of children coming out like Toyota, Ferrari, you name it. They're individuals, and the diversity is beautiful, and they each have their talents and potential. So how can we make sure to serve them in the best way possible?
Thank you.
Thank
you, Jess. Thank you. We are reaching out to the last part of the webinar, and without any time, but we will manage. and I want to connect your ideas with the recent position paper that OMEP has spread during June, and that all committees had distributed in their own languages, I hope, within the countries. In these few months of my presidency, I have had multiple conversations with different committees, actors, governments, international organizations, sharing the OMEP concerns and responses faces this dystopian crisis. Summarizing this experience, the OMEP Executive Committee decided to make public a position paper called Early Childhood Education and Care in the Times of COVID-19. We wanted to highlight certain crucial arguments in the best interest of all the children and their well-being, mainly because most of the state public policies ignore the special characteristics of this early stage and the citizenship of young children, as it was stated by Raul and Jess. In most of the decisions and consideration, children in early childhood have been invisible. The decisions showed an ethnocentric matrix and a health and adult-centric perspective. OMEP wants to stress that state parties are guarantors of the fulfillment of the rights of the child, and they have the duty to implement the necessary policies to protect, to support from birth to children and their families. For more than 70 years, OMEP has been stressing that young children are citizens, and the state parties must consider their specific rights in the context of education, care, health, economy, and social support. Young children require the adoption of specific measures within the framework of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, respecting the right to express their views freely in all matters that affect them, overcoming traditional adultocentric views. That the pandemic measures have deeply affected and changed young children's lives and routines, often with huge limitation and invisible consequences, and as Jess and Raul have been affirming. That kindergartens are fundamental in children's lives, and for that reason, public policies must consider the importance of the continuity of early childhood education and care through creative and wide proposals and strategies. That educational proposals cannot be authoritarian. The pedagogy must consider the need to play, to movement, creativity of young children in relation with the use of technology and the negative impact of long exposures to screens. Based on the variety of consideration that we state in our position paper, we ask the state parties four main things. First of all, respect children's perspective in all matters that affect them, considering the huge inequalities and diversities of experience in childhood, as well as the perspective and knowledge of educators and families that they are not part of the decisions, educators and families. Two, implement early childhood comprehensive public policies, assuring intersectoral articulations and integral views linked with human rights and providing adequate financing. Yes. Three, develop learning programs for caregivers and families to guide and to enrich the proposals for care and education, preventing violence. This is something that has come up the violence inside families through multiple strategies, considering that there are deep inequalities in the access to technology devices and to internet connections. And 4, train teachers and educational staff to improve communication and cooperation with families and caregivers, ensuring the provision of the necessary means. Summing up, we need to create not a new normality, we need to create a new reality for early childhood. Children need the state, need a family, need a civil society determined to promote a holistic and humanistic education to protect their dignity and their rights. OMEP wants to highlight the importance of creating a sustainable world for humanity and for the planet, and particularly for the children. OMEP has the will to continue working in solidarity to defend and maintain the progress made towards the achievement of all the Sustainable Development Goals, especially number 4, focus in number 4, and number 3, because Raul has stressed the connection between both goals. Confident that education is the main tool for building a better world for all, leaving no one behind. Finally, I want to invite you to our 2 dear guests to say goodbye with a little message. Please, Jessica, we hear you.
It's been a pleasure to be a part of this very critical and critically important webinar. I'm so pleased to be here today. Thank you for all of your time, for those who have listened. May we all walk away really compelled to make a difference. And I have a teacher friend who always ends her teacher group meetings, Jennifer Delaney. She's, you know, folks, we're in this good work together. And we sure are. We stand here united. We stand here with a common mission and vision. And we really want to see children have not only survive, but thrive in these times. And this is a very important for them. And we can't get this wrong. We have to get this right. Thank you so much for your time and inspiration from my colleagues here, Mercedes and Raul. Their work is so critical, and I gained like I mentioned, so much inspiration from the words that you share and everything that you're doing to contribute to early childhood education. Let's all continue on that journey. Thanks to everyone in OMEP that made this possible and our friends here on the call. Folks, let's do this and let's get it right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jess. Raul, we're here to you. Well,
well, this is part of the stress I mentioned. Well,
yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you personally, Mercedes, for letting me be here, because it's a challenge, it's an effort. I mean, I really value and really appreciate. I feel that I'm in a healthy place. So we are talking about health with capital letters. And I think that this is a place where we have to promote this kind of discussion. I really also thank you to know your team, and also Jessica. I told her that we spent a whole life to know each other, and finally we met. So I really value the role of OMEP as a matchmaker and to make things happen. And I also want to tell something to all the audience that is spread all over the world. We are in the same house, but or in the same ocean, on the same sea, but we don't share the same vessel, the same ships. So there are people that have the possibility to travel better or to cross this particular situation in a better mood than others. And it has to do with the need to reduce the equity gaps that is affecting our society. From our point of view, from the social pediatrics perspective, the main pandemic that is affecting our world is not coronavirus. The main pandemic is called social injustice and exclusion. So we have to attack that as a root cause that is affecting our world. And also, I assume that we are sharing the same concerns, the same emotions, the same worries about what will happen in the future. And this space is a way to mitigate all the consequences that are affecting our lives after being exposed to this disrupting situation. Thanks again, and hope to keep in contact with all of you.
Thank you, Raul. The time has come. Again, thank you very much, Jess and Raul. Thanks to the World Presidency team, Eliana, Manuela, Gonzalo, and Carlos. And thanks to all the colleagues that have accompanied us on this important day for OMEP and for the advocacy work for children's rights. Best regards for all. Keep healthy and safe, and see you in our next webinars. See you soon.